3 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan attempted something that had never been done in the history of aerial warfare. A round trip of nearly 5,000 miles, 2 aircraft, 5 submarines, 3 carrying aviation fuel, 1 assigned as a weather and rescue boat south of Oahu, 1 sent ahead to survey the refueling lagoon, 1 refueling stop on an uninhabited coral reef in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The target? Pearl Harbor itself. Almost nobody remembers it. Operation K failed. Not with smoke and wreckage, but quietly. And because it failed quietly, the Imperial Japanese Navy never understood what it had actually done. 3 months later, at Midway, they paid for that misunderstanding with 4 aircraft carriers and a strategic initiative they would never recover. By late December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy had a problem nobody wanted to say aloud. Operation Z, the attack on Pearl Harbor, had succeeded by every measurable standard. 8 American battleships sunk, nearly 200 aircraft destroyed on the ground. The Pacific Fleet, on paper, neutralized. But the strategic window Yamamoto had purchased was supposed to last 6 months. By mid-January 1942, the Naval General Staff was no longer sure it would last 3. The American aircraft carriers had not been at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. They were still at sea, operational, and unaccounted for. Reports through diplomatic channels suggested the repair docks at Pearl Harbor were running around the clock. The battleships sunk in the shallow harbor were already being raised from the mud. Japan needed eyes on Pearl Harbor. It had none, not since the attack severed its intelligence network in Hawaii. In mid-January 1942, someone in a Tokyo staff room asked the question out loud. Could they look? The answer came in the form of a machine that, in early 1942, barely existed. The Kawanishi H-8K Type II flying boat was the most capable maritime patrol aircraft ever built. A 124-foot wingspan, 4 engines generating 1,850 horsepower each, top speed approaching 300 miles per hour, 5 20mm cannons, and 5 heavy machine guns, enough that American pilots later nicknamed it the Flying Porcupine. Fully loaded, it could stay airborne for 24 hours. It was also brand new. The first production aircraft had been delivered to the Imperial Japanese Navy in February 1942, 4 weeks before the Naval General Staff went looking for a way to fly one to Hawaii. By March, only 5 existed in the world. 2 were pre-production prototypes, hand-built test aircraft with reduced armor and lighter armament, hull numbers Y-71 and Y-72. These were the aircraft selected for the mission. Lieutenant Hisao Hashizume and Ensign Shosuke Sasao were among the few pilots in the Imperial Navy with any hours in the H-8K cockpit. Both were summoned to Tokyo in late January. Their orders were vague. The aircraft assigned to them had never been intended for combat. 5 H-8K flying boats would depart Wacha Atoll in the Marshall Islands with full fuel and 4 550-pound bombs each. They would fly 1,900 miles northeast to French Frigate Shoals, an uninhabited coral atoll 560 miles northwest of Oahu, charted by the Americans primarily as a navigation hazard. 3 submarines, I-15, I-19, and I-26, would be waiting on the lagoon surface. Their crews would transfer aviation fuel to the flying boats by hand, at night, without lights or radio. The aircraft would then fly the remaining 560 miles to Pearl Harbor, bomb the repair dock where the December 7th battleships were being salvaged, and return to the shoals for a second refueling before the 1,900-mile flight home. Total distance? Approximately 5,000 miles. Total duration? 36 hours. The longest unescorted bombing mission ever attempted by any nation. What Tokyo did not know was that someone was already watching. Commander Joseph Rochefort ran Station HYPO, the Navy's signals intelligence unit for the Central Pacific, from a windowless basement room at Pearl Harbor. His team of 30 officers and enlisted men worked 70-hour weeks intercepting Japanese naval radio traffic. Rochefort, who had long since abandoned standard officer dress in favor of red felt slippers and a smoking jacket, had been reading Japanese communications for months. In February 1942, his team noticed a pattern. Radio traffic from the Yokohama Air Group at Wacha increased sharply. Long-range submarines began clustering in the same communications as the air group and appeared to be moving toward open ocean roughly 500 miles northwest of Oahu. The conclusion was straightforward. Japan was preparing an aircraft operation against Hawaii, with submarine refueling at a remote atoll. The warning went up the chain of command. It was largely set aside. HYPO had read warning signs before December 7th. Those had not been acted on. There was no institutional trust yet to spend. The mission launched in the first week of March 1942. Before a single engine started, 3 things had already failed. The rescue submarine positioned south of Oahu had gone silent on February 14th and never answered again. The United States Navy had changed its weather encryption codes on March 1st, cutting Japanese access to Hawaii's forecasts overnight. And the 3 refueling submarines had been pulled from French Frigate Shoals in late February to chase an American carrier task force, only just returning to position when the operation launched. Y-71 and Y-72 lifted from the lagoon at Wacha and turned northeast into a Pacific they could no longer read, toward a target they no longer had weather data for, with no rescue asset in place if anything went wrong. The refueling at French Frigate Shoals worked, remarkably. 3 hours in total darkness, no lights, no radio, submarines and aircraft exchanging fuel hoses by hand on open water. Both aircraft took on full loads. Then, Y-71 hit a swell on takeoff. Hashizume got airborne, but there was now a crack in the hull. He could feel it in the handling. He kept climbing. He had 560 miles to go. The 2 H-8Ks separated in cloud cover and flew the final leg independently. American radar on Kauai picked them up at 1 a.m. on March 4th. Pearl Harbor went to general quarters. The blackout was immediate and total. Fighters lifted from Oahu's airfields into a ceiling they couldn't penetrate. Patrol aircraft searched the ocean for the carrier that had to be out there somewhere. There was no carrier. Hashizume rolled out over Oahu at 2 a.m. The cloud ceiling broke just enough to see the ground. What he saw was darkness. Before the war, Pearl Harbor had been the brightest installation in the Central Pacific, visible for miles. In 3 months, the Navy had blacked it out entirely. The base that had been the most visible landmark in the Pacific was now indistinguishable from open ocean. The only lights anywhere were faint patches over Honolulu, 6 miles east of the target. Hashizume flew across the island once, then again. The hull damage and fuel state didn't allow a third pass. He released 4 bombs from 15,000 feet onto the brightest concentration of light he could find. It was not Pearl Harbor. It was the wooded slope of Mount Tantalus, an extinct cinder cone 6 miles northeast of the harbor, 1,000 feet from Roosevelt High School. 4 craters opened in the hillside. Trees came down. The shockwave broke the school's windows. Nobody was killed. Nobody was hurt. Sasao, unable to find the island at all, released his bombs into the ocean. While the H-8Ks were still returning to the Marshalls, a Los Angeles radio station broadcast an unverified report of 30 Americans dead and 70 wounded at Pearl Harbor from a Japanese attack. No source, no confirmation. Japanese signals intelligence intercepted it and forwarded it to the Naval General Staff. Operation K was declared a complete success. The Imperial Japanese Navy had no independent means of assessing what its aircraft had actually struck. The mission report said the aircraft had reached Pearl Harbor, dropped their bombs, and returned. An American rumor appeared to confirm damage. There was no process designed to produce the answer that nothing had happened. So the Naval General Staff was told they had won, and they believed it. On March 7th, Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, Fleet Intelligence Officer to Admiral Nimitz, turned to a colleague on his own staff, Lieutenant Jasper Holmes, and asked a simple question. If the Tantalus explosions had been a Japanese attack, how would they have done it? Holmes answered immediately. Long-range seaplanes from the Marshalls, submarine refueling at French Frigate Shoals, continuation to Oahu. Holmes was also, under a pseudonym, the author of a 1941 Saturday Evening Post story called Rendezvous, describing in operational detail exactly the concept Japan had just executed. Navy censors had held the story for over a year, considering it too dangerous to publish. Layton later suggested Japan had lifted the idea directly from the story. Holmes disagreed, arguing that submarine refueled seaplane operations were a well-known tactical concept in naval circles, and that the parallel was coincidence, not plagiarism. Whether Japan copied it or arrived at it independently, the operational match was exact, and the Americans had just been handed a free lesson in how it worked. The seaplane tender USS Ballard was underway to French Frigate Shoals the next morning. By the end of March, the atoll had patrols, mines, and a permanent American presence in the lagoon. In May 1942, with the combined fleet preparing for Midway, the Naval General Staff chose the obvious solution to their carrier location problem. Repeat Operation K. Same atoll, same submarines, same aircraft. A reconnaissance flight over Pearl Harbor on May 30th, 6 days before the fleet arrived at Midway, would locate the American carriers. On May 30th, the lead submarine surfaced at French Frigate Shoals on schedule. USS Ballard was at anchor. The lagoon was mined. The submarine went back under without surfacing fully. The mission was canceled. The combined fleet sailed into Midway with no intelligence on the position of the American carriers. Staff assumptions filled the gap. The carriers were probably at Pearl Harbor. The fleet would capture Midway and ambush the Americans when they came to react. The Americans were already northeast of Midway, waiting. By June 7th, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu were on the bottom of the Pacific. Over 3,000 Japanese sailors were dead. Japan's offensive capability in the Pacific was finished. Operation K was designed to ensure Japan would win at Midway. Its first flight, instead, taught the Americans exactly how the refueling method worked and gave them 3 months to occupy the only lagoon the operation could use. Its second flight never happened, and the combined fleet sailed blind. A plan can execute perfectly as a technical sequence and still accomplish nothing. Operation K crossed 5,000 miles of open ocean, refueled from submarines in the dark, reached its target, and brought both aircraft home. Every moving part worked. The bombs hit a mountain. And 3 months later, the same plan ran into an anchorage the United States Navy had occupied specifically because Japan had already taught them it would be coming.